There is a specific kind of person who knows exactly what they're doing and counts on you to be too gracious to say so. Claire had known this about her sister for most of her adult life, not in a bitter way, or at least, not only in a bitter way, more in the way you know a road has a bad curve on it. You don't hate the road. You just drive accordingly. So when Meredith walked through the doors of the Hargrove estate at 11:47 on a Saturday morning, 20 minutes after the ceremony had already begun, which meant she entered during the processional, which meant every head turned, and she was wearing white, Claire felt something settle in her chest rather than rise, not calm exactly. Recognition. The dress was ivory, technically. Meredith would say that later. Claire was certain of it. It was ivory, Claire. I didn't think it would be a thing, the distinction that erases the intention. The apology shaped like a correction. It had a low back. It had a skirt that moved. It was, by any honest measure, a wedding dress worn by someone who was not the bride, Donna, Claire's maid of honor, who had flown back from Vancouver for this, who had taken 4 days off work and not once mentioned it as a sacrifice, grabbed Claire's arm at the altar. Not hard. Just the pressure of someone checking that you're still there. Claire was still there. She smoothed the front of her dress with one hand and turned slightly toward the photographer, a quiet woman named Renata, who had been shooting weddings for 11 years and who Claire had briefed extensively, not about Meredith specifically, because Claire hadn't known she'd need to, but about documentation. Trait every entrance like it matters. Get angles I won't think to ask for. Capture what people do when they think no one is watching. Renata had understood. She was already moving. The memory that surfaced, standing at that altar, wasn't the worst one. It was the small one, Claire's college graduation. Meredith had arrived 40 minutes late, sliding into the road just as Claire's name was being called, wearing a red dress she'd bought for a party the weekend before. She'd hugged Claire afterward and said, "I made it, didn't I?" Like arrival was the same thing as presence. Like the 40 minutes were Claire's failure of gratitude rather than Meredith's failure of effort. There had been other moments. The promotion dinner that became a conversation about Meredith's job. The engagement announcement that Meredith had responded to with a long story about her own almost engagement 3 years prior. Each moment was small enough to dismiss. Together they formed something else, a shape Claire had spent a long time refusing to look at directly. She looked at it now, briefly, and then she looked at her husband, James, who was watching her with an expression that asked nothing and offered everything. And she thought. The ceremony continued. Meredith sat in the third row. She crossed her legs. She smiled at people who turned to look at her, and people did turn to look at her, because the human eye finds disruption. That's simply what it does, and her smile had a particular quality to it. Bright, slightly elevated. The smile of someone who has gotten away with something and is waiting for the room to confirm it. The room did not confirm it. Claire's mother-in-law, Margaret, sat 2 rows ahead of Meredith. She did not turn around, but her posture shifted, a small, precise adjustment, like a door closing quietly. During cocktail hour, a woman named Helen moved through the room. Helen managed events at the Hargrove estate. She had done so for 19 years. She had seen most things. She saw this thing immediately. A guest in white at a wedding is not a subtle problem, and she made her way to the wedding planner, and then, after a brief conversation, to Meredith herself. Claire did not witness the exchange directly. She heard about it from Dana, who had witnessed it from 8 feet away while pretending to examine the charcuterie board. Helen had been warm, efficient. She gestured toward the garden terrace visible through the tall windows and mentioned that the outdoor lighting at the estate photographed particularly cold for lighter colors. A problem they documented often, she said, and they kept wraps on hand for exactly this reason. She'd produced a deep green pashmina. Substantial, beautiful even. You'll want this for the photos, Helen had said. Not a question. Meredith had worn it for the remainder of the evening. Donna had described her expression as someone who had reached for a door handle and found it wasn't there. The slideshow ran at 7:15 between dinner and dancing. Claire had built it herself 6 weeks before the wedding, in the quiet of a Tuesday evening with James asleep in the next room. It was not designed as a response to anything. It was designed as a record of the people who had shown up across her life, in the ordinary and the difficult and the unremarkable moments that accumulate into something that matters. Donna, frozen mid-law at a birthday 3 years ago. Claire's Aunt Patricia, who had driven 2 hours to help her try on dresses and never once made it about anything other than Claire. James's grandmother, Eleanor, 91 years old, who had spent 4 evenings embroidering a small cluster of forget-me-nots onto the inner hem of Claire's veil because she'd asked what Claire's favorite flower was and then simply gone ahead and done something about it. Meredith appeared once, a group photograph from a family reunion in 2019. 8 people standing in front of a lake. Meredith was at the edge of the frame, slightly out of focus, smiling at something outside the camera's reach. Accurate, Claire thought, watching it appear and then dissolve into the next image. Unintentionally accurate. James held her hand during the slideshow. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. That was the thing about him she hadn't known how to explain to anyone before she understood it herself, that his presence didn't require constant verbal confirmation. He just stayed after the dancing, after the cake, after Meredith had hugged her goodbye with the wrap still around her shoulders and said, "It was beautiful, Claire, it really was," in a voice that sounded almost like she meant it. After all of it, Claire stood in the empty reception hall with her shoes off and her veil unpinned, and Dana sitting on the edge of the stage eating leftover cake with a dessert fork. "You okay?" Dana asked. Claire considered the question honestly. "I think so," she said. "Ask me again in a few weeks." Donna nodded, took another bite of cake, didn't push. Outside, the grounds were dark and very quiet. Claire didn't know yet what she would do about Meredith. Whether this became the moment she finally named the pattern aloud, or whether it settled back into the long, complicated sediment of family. She didn't know if she had the energy for a conversation, or the capacity to keep pretending the conversation wasn't necessary. What she knew was this: she had gotten married today. She had stood next to the right person. The flowers had been exactly right. Eleanor's forget-me-nots were hidden in the hem of her veil, just for her, and she had felt them there all day like a small and private piece of armor. That was what she would remember. The rest she was still deciding.